The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I want to start today's show with a few different stories related to what is fiscally conservative and what isn't. Where should the government be spending money, and where is spending money a waste? Where should money be coming from the point of view of the government, and where is it really not a good source of revenue for the government to be receiving money? Let's start with the minimum wage. Raising the federal minimum wage to $10.10 would save the federal government $7.6 billion per year. This is a new study from the Economic Policy Institute, it's a think tank that focuses on labor issues. If the minimum wage federally were raised to $10.10 per hour, which has been proposed by the Fair Minimum Wage Act of 2014, more than 1.7 million Americans would no longer have to rely on public assistance programs. The reduction in spending on public assistance programs as a direct result of that minimum wage increase would add up to about $7.6 billion per year in savings for the federal government. Half of all people that currently earn less than $10.10 per hour, it's roughly 12 million Americans, receive some form of means-tested benefits from the government. This includes the Earned Income Tax Credit, food stamps, and others. And EPI researchers estimate that by raising the minimum wage to $10.10, it would boost wages for about 27 million American workers, and this would reduce the benefits paid by about $7.6 billion. That's just the immediate financial cost, the direct financial savings, so to speak, from that minimum wage increase. Not only that, we also have this entire other benefit, which is harder to measure, as we've talked about before, of having fewer people in poverty. There's an intangible benefit to fewer people in poverty with regard to crime, with regard to satisfaction, and of course, we have to think of the multiplier effect of more people having more money that can be spent anywhere, stimulating small and medium-sized businesses. It's way more than the $7.6 billion in reality, Lewis.
And you might have more productive employees if they're making more money, but also if everyone in the country is suddenly making more money, they're also paying more taxes.
No question about it. And that's also part of the additional revenue that would exist for the government. The nonsense voodoo economics, and I know this is a term that applies to supply side economics, that is still passed as legitimate economic theory by some in this country is bewildering to me. And I don't fully understand it. I understand that there's a very strong desire by those who want to maintain the status quo supply side thinking of pushing this stuff as actual valid scientific thought. But the more we learn, Lewis, the more we know that the voodoo economics just does not make sense.
No, and I think you've got small business owners all over the country saying that this will destroy them. But like I always say, 80% of people are completely incompetent at their jobs.
Yes, you've said that many, many times, sometimes much to the dismay of our audience, but not always. Many people also agreeing with you on that. U.S. taxpayers save $7 for every dollar that the government spends on family planning. Yet more data, ladies and gentlemen, about what our priorities should be when it comes to the budget and spending. Publicly funded family planning programs help taxpayers save billions of dollars every year through a number of mechanisms. Number one, it averts costly medical expenses, according to a new analysis from the Guttmacher Institute. This is the largest data point in what is now a growing body of evidence that says there are huge societal benefits, both in terms of culture and in terms of economics, when it comes to funding family planning, sex education, and contraception. And the religious right wants to hear none of it. They don't care. They say they want to reduce the number of abortions, but they don't favor any policy that would actually do that. They just want to shut down abortion clinics. It's not hard to understand why it is so fiscally conservative to fund family planning. Low-income women are at the highest risk of unintended pregnancy, in great part because they don't always have access to medical resources like contraception. When you put together a program like Title X that helps provide women, low-income women, with birth control, it makes a huge difference. We have that study from St. Louis recently, which shows us that the number of unintended pregnancies and thus the number of abortions goes down when you provide access to birth control. Guttmacher researchers estimate that the care provided at publicly funded family planning clinics, listen to this, ladies and gentlemen, helped prevent 2.2 million unplanned pregnancies in 2010. Do the math. Some percentage of those would eventually be terminated pregnancies based on elective abortions. This prevents abortion, Lewis. It's so clear, it's so simple, and the religious right doesn't care. They don't want to hear it.
Week after week, we just see more evidence that if you make things easier and safer for people and for families, not only is it the right thing to do, but it ends up saving money.
Not only because of this, though, Lewis, but also because of, do you know how expensive it is to treat cervical cancer and to treat STDs? And when you think about the screening and the prevention, it saves you so much more. And it's quantified here. It's $7 saved for every dollar spent. That's a pretty big return.
And I think, unfortunately, religion is a big part of the problem here.
Yeah, that's a factor. And it's also, as we've talked about, the strict father morality. And when you look at it, there's this kind of weird contradiction. Because on one hand, Republicans don't want all these would-be liberal voters from poor people, from black people, all the groups that the right unfairly paints as these irresponsible child bearers, right? We've heard these horrible racist stories of welfare queens that with Cadillacs that never existed when Ronald Reagan told the story. At the same time, so on the one hand, they believe that all of these children will eventually become Democratic voters, right? And they want to prevent that. At the same time, they want abortion to be illegal. They don't want to provide the resources that would prevent unintended pregnancies. And putting aside the fact that they don't seem to realize that when somebody wants to have an abortion, they figure out a way to have an abortion. There's almost just a dumb contradiction. They don't want a demographic shift, as they call it, that will create more Democratic voters. And at the same time, they don't provide the resources to prevent unintended pregnancy and reduce abortion. It makes no sense, even at its immoral base, Lewis. It makes no sense to me.
Yeah, it's completely irrational and illogical, but I don't know what's getting in the way. I guess religion, misinformation, the strict father morality, it's a mess.
Let's talk a little bit about the costs of moving towards renewable energy. Big focus on fiscal conservatism today, Lewis. This could almost be a right-wing show if it weren't for the fact that we're actually logically connecting the ways in which we spend and save money to the consequences that would follow. That's not often something you get on right-wing media. A recent Union of Concerned Scientists study found that the United States could quadruple its renewable electricity from wind and solar in the next 15 years, reaching 23% by 2030. Well, we could do it, but of course that would be really, really expensive. Nobody could afford that, right? Well, not really. It turns out that by increasing our solar and wind energy as a percentage of total energy consumption for electricity to 23%, it would cost only 18 cents per household per month. 18 cents, Lewis. And this does not take into consideration, over the longer term, the net benefit to our society, to our economy, to our planet of shifting towards renewable energy. It's such a no-brainer, and we just can't seem to get the right on board. They say, oh no, we need private industry to do it, but at the same time, we shouldn't be providing private industry with the right incentives because it's going to hurt the fossil fuel companies. We have such a disgusting, it's so base and lowbrow what we're seeing in terms of the opposition to a real shift to renewable energy. And we could move to almost a quarter solar and wind for electricity for 18 cents per household per month.
So over 15 years, that's $32. That seems really low, but I guess it's low because our current percentage of renewable energy is so low, and we'd only be going up to about 23% countrywide. Right.
Germany already gets 15% of its electricity from renewables. Spain at 19%. Denmark at 30%. The U.S. is at 3.6%. 8%. A recent study from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory shows that using technologies that are commercially available today, the U.S. could obtain 80% of its electricity from renewable sources by 2050. Forget about the fact that by 2050, we will have such drastically more efficient and advanced renewable energy technologies. It's, when you think about it, Lewis, with today's technology, we could be getting 80% of our electricity from renewables. Imagine what we're going to see. Forget about the next 36 years, just in the next 6.
Yeah. And ultimately when the fossil fuels and the natural gas run out, those big energy and oil companies will have to switch to renewable energy. But we don't want to see barrel prices hit $1,000 a piece before that happens.
No, certainly not. A city has shortened the duration of the yellow lights on its traffic lights, and they were able to write $8 million in additional tickets as a result. Earlier this year, Chicago started giving traffic tickets to drivers who went through yellow lights that turned red fractions of a second shorter than the 3-second city minimum. In principle, Chicago has a 3-second minimum for a yellow light before it turns red. They changed that. They shortened it slightly and started sending out camera tickets, these red light camera tickets, to people who went through slightly after, fractions of a second after the light turned red. That was a slight change, but it provided $8 million from an additional 77,000 tickets, according to the city's inspector general. All of these $100 tickets were issued after cameras were installed at intersections, and they caught the drivers as they passed through. This was supposedly, Lewis, established in the name of public safety, right? You make it costly to run a red light, and people are going to be less likely to run red lights. However, what the city did really was create a revenue generation mechanism. They shortened the yellow lights beyond that 3-second minimum, and we're talking here about somebody who ran a red by fractions of a second. Arguably, I wouldn't say through no fault of their own, they're controlling their vehicle, but based on a deception, right? The city changed the duration of these yellow lights. This is not a public safety mechanism. If anything, this could be an added danger, because in the same way that it turns red a few fractions of a second earlier, the light for the cross traffic turns green a few fractions of a second later. You're creating a situation where you might have more accidents. Why? Because you want to collect revenue, $8 million worth.
Of course, that's it. The cities that have extended the duration of their yellow lights have had less accidents as a result of that, and that's the reality of it. So
fewer accidents, even.
Fewer accidents, of course. Excuse my poor English. So Chicago is actually making things more dangerous for people, and they don't care. This is about generating revenue,
of course,
which they probably desperately need, but there's got to be better ways to do it.
You can actually read online, if you've received one of these camera tickets, there have been 2 mechanisms that have been used to successfully fight camera red light tickets. And one of those is, just because your vehicle has been identified as running a red light, there is no evidence, unless your face is actually visible on camera, that you were the driver of the vehicle. Your vehicle could have been borrowed. Your vehicle could have been driven by someone else at the time. And I know people personally who have successfully fought these tickets by saying, if you can provide me any evidence that I was the driver of the vehicle at the time of the alleged infraction, I would be glad to pay. And many people I know, Lewis, have had their tickets dropped as a result of that. The other is, and this is a little more nebulous, I don't fully get it, you presumably have a right to face your accuser. And when the accuser is a camera, I've read, I don't know personally, no personal anecdotes on this one, that when you ask to appeal this and to face your accuser, that people have not heard back and the ticket has been dropped. I'm less sure about the certainty of that, but certainly saying, prove I was driving the vehicle is a good start for fighting these tickets.
Absolutely. That would be my first move. And hopefully I don't have to deal with this at all, though.
Twitter.com/dpackman. Follow me on Twitter. Back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show membership program is made possible in part by liberalbias.com. And if you're worried about liberal bias in statistics, math, and other reality-based things, liberalbias.com shows you how to unskew reality, making it easier for conservatives to handle. Go to liberalbias.com and learn more. Today's new member of the day is Kimberly Murphy. Kimberly Murphy, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. We exist because of members like Kimberly. Couldn't do it without you. Go to davidpakman.com/membership to sign up today. We talked last week about this North Carolina magistrate who, in spite of the fact that North Carolina now has same-sex marriage legalized, refused to marry a gay couple, presumably because of some kind of sincerely held, you've heard me, you know the phrase. The phrase makes me a little nauseous. Let me see if I can get through it. Sincerely held religious belief. Yeah, I said it. Because of that, the guy didn't want to marry this gay couple. North Carolina magistrates have now been specifically directed to perform civil marriages for same-sex couples or face suspension or firing from their state jobs. This is a memo that was written to magistrates. It says they would be violating their oaths of office by refusing to marry gay or lesbian couples. In Idaho, the Alliance Defending Freedom attorneys filed a federal lawsuit and a motion for a temporary restraining order to stop officials in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, from forcing two ordained Christian ministers to perform same-sex weddings. City officials told Donald Knapp that he and his wife, Evelyn, they're both ordained ministers who run Hitching Post Wedding Chapel, are required to perform same-sex marriages or face months in jail and or thousands of dollars in fines. This is absolutely what needs to happen. We've created this kind of special pleading with regard to religion that it's exempt. You always hear, oh, whoa, that's offensive to me. If you say that I have to marry gay people or serve gay people in my business, it's offensive based on my religion. It's a complete special pleading fallacy, Lewis, to say, oh, if it's because of religion, you're allowed to be offended. And quite frankly, I'm sick of this whole offended thing. And we had this happen that time when I interviewed Christian homeschooler Mike McHugh, and I asked him, does it make sense to have a educational curricula based on Jesus? And he said, you've offended me with that question about my friend Jesus. And I fell for it. I backed off. And we shouldn't fall for this, oh, I'm offended, we can't talk about it, right? I thought right-wingers were for the rule of law and were for of states' rights. And they seem to be ignoring that here in favor of, oh, I'm offended because of my religion here.
Yeah, these people are breaking the law. We're breaking the law, did break the law. And they don't have to marry people if they don't want to. But if they decide that they do want to marry people, they have to include everyone.
Right. No one's forcing you to be in the business of marrying people. If you choose to do that, there may be laws you have to abide by. If you want to be in the insurance business, there are certain laws you have to abide by. If you want to drive a car, there are certain regulations you have to abide by. That is not the government's strong arm of those who are offended. I mean, it's just pathetic that this is what the argument has become. One of the most extreme candidates I remember talking about really might get elected. Joni Ernst is a Republican member of the Iowa Senate and was a lieutenant colonel in the Iowa National Guard. She's a candidate for U.S. Senate in Iowa in the 2014 election. She said that she has her sights set on Obamacare while she was firing a gun in a TV ad. She said that she grew up castrating hogs and that that's a reason that she would be a good senator. She said, quote, "We don't know that there were weapons of mass destruction on the ground when we went into Iraq. However, I do have reason to believe that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. That was the intelligence that was operated on," implying, I guess, that they were moved or something. She has also proposed eliminating the IRS, the Department of Education, and the Environmental Protection Agency as a way of cutting federal spending. As an Iowa state senator, she co-sponsored a resolution that would nullify federal law. State doesn't want to follow federal law? We're going to pass something that will let us just ignore it altogether. She opposes having a minimum wage federally, saying states should have sole authority over their own minimum wages. And she also indirectly endorsed Paul Ryan's partial privatization of Medicare model in 2011 by voting in favor of that in the Iowa Senate. This is one of the most dangerous and extreme candidates that we've seen. She's not as boisterously or flamboyantly crazy, although her "I castrated hogs" ad is certainly pretty far up there. But her positions, Lewis, are downright dangerous.
They are. I think that even if we had a Republican majority and a Republican president, that her ideas are so crazy they still wouldn't come to fruition.
Well, but see, that's a fair argument, but it still moves the center of the political spectrum in the Senate to the right if she's elected, and we just want to avoid that.
Yeah, I mean, having a woman like this in any position is a bad thing. So of course, we're hoping that she gets defeated.
New study says that drinking what is now called a medium soda each day can age you as much as smoking. There's been this commercial I've been seeing on TV where soda and fast food companies are all coming together to teach people about healthy eating. Once I finished laughing and then crying about the fact that a soda company was now on national television saying they were going to help you eat healthier, I came across this study, which was published in the peer-reviewed Journal of Public Health. This was a study of 5,300 adults, and they compared the cells of people who drink soda every day to those of their non-soda drinking counterparts. And in the soda group, the ends of the chromosomes, these are known as telomeres, were shorter. This is a sign of aging. Telomeres naturally shorten with age, and they represent a diminished ability for cells to regenerate. And the telomeres were drastically shortened in the soda drinking group, whereas they were not in the group that did not drink soda. 4.6 years of telomere aging is what was seen in those who drank a 20-ounce soda every day. This is the same amount observed in smokers. Now, there are a few caveats here that I want to bring up. Number one, the study did not find that individuals who drink sugar-free or diet sodas, right, the ones that have artificial sweeteners instead of corn syrup. They did not find the telomere shortening there. They also did not find it in those who drank a medium fruit juice every day. And of course, fruit juice has significant amounts of sugar, but not corn syrup. So number one, we should distinguish, or at least be aware of the fact that we haven't really identified what element of soda it is that has contributed to the telomere shrinking. And we also haven't identified, Lewis, whether it's some other thing, some other activity that those who drink regular sodas every day are participating in that might be aging their cells in a way that's equivalent to smoking. So there are definitely a lot of questions here. What we do seem to know is that drinking soda every day is a really, really bad idea.
We can say that with certitude, yeah, and that should be avoided altogether. I have stopped drinking soda completely years ago.
Same here.
And I am very glad that I've done that.
And the other thing I'll mention with regard to this, I wonder, those who drink a soda a day in other countries where their soda is sweetened with sugar versus corn syrup, would we see the same effects on telomeres? Remember that in the US, most soda is sweetened, at least the big corporate sodas, are sweetened with high fructose corn syrup. When you go to even Mexico and order a Coke, corn syrup is not one of the ingredients. It's cane sugar that's used to sweeten. I'd be interested in seeing if that also made an impact. So an interesting study. Doesn't really tell us everything we need to know. It does bring up a lot of interesting questions, though, about sugar and corn syrup and soda consumption. Next, Mark Potok from the Southern Poverty Law Center will join us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome Mark Potok back to the program. He is a senior fellow at the Southern Poverty Law Center in Montgomery, Alabama. Mark, of course, we've been following this flare-up that took place involving Sam Harris, Bill Maher, and Ben Affleck on Bill Maher's program. that was focused around whether it's bigoted or discriminatory or racist to characterize a large religion, the Islamic faith, as violent or not. And of course, we saw such fallout in corporate media after that. And one of the themes that my audience has been talking to me about is, David, can you go back and talk about, when we talk about terrorist groups and hate groups in the U.S., what really are the characteristics and location and political leanings of these groups? So let's start at the broadest point possible. SPLC tracks and follows these groups. What broad trends have you seen over the last decade or so?
Well, in the last 10 years, we've seen an expansion, quite a significant and steady one, of hate groups, of groups like the Klan and neo-Nazi organizations and so on. But by far most spectacularly, we have seen a rise in the so-called patriot movement, the militias that we saw so much of in the 1990s. That growth has been absolutely stunning since 2008, right up to the present moment. As far as jihadist type groups, of course, we don't really have in the United States so much groups as individuals who in one way or another get sucked into that world and act either here or abroad, going to fight with ISIS and so on in Syria.
Is there any way to quantify how significant those individuals, and as you said, when they're not part of a group here in the U.S., it can be difficult. Do we have any data, or is it even possible to quantify how big of a movement that is?
Well, what I can tell you is that several studies by terrorism experts in the last few years have shown that since 9/11, in fact, the number of Americans murdered by radical jihadists, as opposed to people on the radical right, is significantly smaller. In other words, the extreme right is more of a threat, at least in terms of people murdered and attacks and so on. Much has been said about the Muslim community in the United States, including the idea put forth by Congressman Peter King, among others, that Muslims do not cooperate with law enforcement in this country, that they are in effect covering up for their extremist brothers. And that, as a matter of real statistics, is completely false. There was, for instance, a study out of the Triangle Center, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, that showed a majority of Muslim plots or jihadist plots in this country, in fact, were uncovered and reported to authorities by other members of the Muslim community.
So even if someone were to argue that we simply don't know how big the threat is from those individuals or groups in the U.S. because they refuse to tell law enforcement about it, we actually have data that tells us that's false. That wouldn't be an accurate explanation as to why on paper that threat would be underrepresented.
That's right. That's right. I mean, look, I don't think that anything we say should diminish what happened on 9/11. Close to 3,000 people were murdered in a single day, a single hour, really. And that is something the likes of which we've not seen. The closest thing we saw from the radical right, of course, was the 1995 bombing of the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, the death toll of which was 168 people, including 19 small children. Nevertheless, it is, I think, always worth remembering that it's not for want of trying. I remember, for instance, in the late 1990s, there was a Klan plot to blow up a particular natural gas refinery in Wise County, Texas, for some crazy reason. The idea was that they would blow this refinery up. The chaos would be such that all emergency police and medical personnel would rush to the scene. And these Klansmen thought they would go across to the other side of the county and rob banks and so on to fund the revolution, the coming race war, and what have you. The point of my story is that when arrests were made, and they were made because the leader of that clavern, cold feet, and reported to the authorities what was going on, federal officials said that had the plotters succeeded, they would likely have killed between 10 and 30,000 people, which I need not remind you is 10 times the number of people who were murdered on 9/11.
And Mark, if we were to focus for a second on the not so much the groups and not so much the failed attempts, but let's focus just for a second on actual acts of domestic terrorism in the United States. How can you characterize which groups, and if it's one type of group or a group of groups, so to speak, what is the political motivation or orientation or religious motivation or orientation of those that actually commit these acts of domestic terror here in the United States?
Well, of course they vary, but I would say predominantly those acts of terror have come from the extreme right, as opposed to any kind of jihadist formations or even individuals. And really, I think most of the violence has come out of the militia movement or people in that world. So the motivation is, in effect, a view of the federal government as an evil conspirator. Militia groups essentially all subscribe to one version or another of the following conspiracy theory: the idea that the federal government is about to impose martial law, that as soon as that happens, probably with the aid of UN blue helmets, Americans' guns will all be seized. Any who resist will be thrown into concentration camps being run by FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and ultimately the United States will be forced into a kind of socialistic one world government, the so-called New World Order. You know, that is a wild tale, of course, which has no basis in reality. But that kind of ideology seems to encompass a huge array of grievances against the government. They're taking our guns away. They are pushing same-sex marriage. They are creating a government that is too large. They're creating a national healthcare system that will ruin our healthcare system. All of these complaints about what the government is doing tend to get wrapped into this very large conspiracy theory. And for whatever reason, that seems to be the sector from which most of the violence is coming.
And have you seen that this has become the kind of a primary driver of this violence before President Obama was elected president? Has this rise happened more markedly during President Obama's presidency?
Well, of course, the first dramatic rise we saw was in the 90s, peaking in 96 under Bill Clinton, another relatively, I suppose, liberal Democrat. And as you suggest in your question, absolutely. The absolutely stunning growth that we've seen began, in fact, in late 2008 and was extremely tightly tied to the rise of Barack Obama, the man who would become our first black president. It's perhaps worth remembering that even before Obama left the Democratic Convention where he was nominated, if I remember, in August of 2008 in Denver, there was a skinhead plot to murder him. There were a whole series of other plots before he was elected. For instance, another skinhead plot in October out of Tennessee. There were plans by one particular man on the extreme right to set off a dirty bomb at the inauguration. And it goes on and on and on. So yes, absolutely, the rise seems to be tied directly to Obama. And I think it is not merely a direct kind of racial hatred of Obama, the black man, but what Obama represents. And what President Obama represents is the demographic browning of America. The idea, as the Census Bureau has predicted, that whites will fall under 50% of the population for the first time, will lose their majority in about the next 30 years, by 2043. That is, I think, enormously important. It's a real change that is really happening. We're seeing evidence of it every day. And for quite a number of white Americans in particular, that gives them a feeling, if not of outright simple racism, a la the Klan, a feeling that this is not the country I grew up in. It has somehow been taken over by other people. And at the same time, of course, the economy collapsed in the fall of 2008 as well. And that certainly added a whole other level of anger and angst and really rage to the equation.
I want to remind everybody we've been speaking with Mark Potok. He is a senior fellow at the Southern Poverty Law Center. Definitely go to the SPLC's website and sign up for their news dispatches. Very valuable research happening there. Mark, thanks as always for joining us.
A real pleasure, David. Thanks for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
One of the coolest things about the New York subway is that there are really, really good musicians who often play in the subway station. Sometimes full jazz bands, sometimes vocalists, sometimes a cappella groups. There's really good music in the New York subway stations. And a few days ago, New York City police arrested a subway performer who was singing and had an acoustic guitar, okay? And the police officer, before arresting this individual, whose name is Andrew Colleen, actually read the law that allows the performer to be there to him. So before we play the video, and the video is amazing, I'll read the law to you. Here's what it says about performing in the subway. Except as expressly permitted in this subdivision, no person shall engage in any non-transit uses upon any facility or conveyance. Non-transit uses are non-commercial activities that are not directly related to the use of a facility or conveyance for transportation. The following non-transit uses are permitted by the authority, provided they do not impede transit activities and that they're conducted in accordance with the rules. Public speaking, campaigning, leafletting, distributing written non-commercial materials, activities intended to encourage and facilitate voter registration, artistic performances, including the acceptance of donations. As long as you're not impeding the progress of people, the movement of individuals in the subway, you are allowed to do an artistic performance. And who could argue that singing and playing guitar is not an artistic performance? Here's the first bit of this video. This is all caught on tape. The singer basically says, "Cuff me. If you want me to stop, cuff me." And the cop doesn't, because maybe he sees how absurd this all is and says, "I'm not cuffing you, I'm not arresting you, but you just have to go." Check this out.
Get your stuff and leave. You're leaving. I'm not. No, you are leaving. I'm not. By force, or you're going to go out on your own.
Okay, you can arrest me, sir, but I'm not.
Get your stuff. You're being ejected.
You can put cuffs on me if you
No,
want.
no. Being ejected doesn't mean you're arrested. It means you're getting thrown out of the station. Now get your stuff and let's go and leave.
I will not stay here.
Why? 85 near Metropolitan Avenue, not emergency.
You know, Freebird? He's allowed to stay here. That's all it is.
Tell me your email again.
Okay, so the guy doesn't leave. He starts singing and playing again. This same police officer comes back. And remember, there's probably something else this police officer could be doing now. And by that, I don't mean stopping and frisking black kids. That's not at all what I'm saying he should be doing. I mean actual dealing with crime. But instead, the cop comes back and actually grabs the guy's guitar, who keeps singing after his guitar is taken.
How I wish you were here. We're just two lost souls swimming in a fish bowl.
And then the police officer comes back again, this time with backup. You'll actually see him signal. There must have been an undercover officer or another police officer on the other side of the platform. So an even bigger police officer shows up and an undercover guy. They hit the singer in the face with his own guitar, toss it haphazardly onto the floor, and then the undercover police officer comes over, it gets ugly, and he arrests this guy. Check this out.
You don't have something better to do? There's people breaking laws, real laws. Dangerous people in the city.
That's what I'm saying.
There's people in
It's a fraction of New York. Go upstairs. Woo! Hey, you can't do that. Oh! Woo! Woo!
An NYPD spokesperson told Gothamist that Colleen was performing and accepting donations without permission from the MTA. As the law says, If you're not impeding progress, you haven't broken a law. They've also said that he was charged with loitering because he was a transit recidivist with an open ticket or warrant possibly related to turnstile jumping or a similar offense. He was not breaking a law, ladies and gentlemen, and thus the entire incident with police was completely unwarranted. What is wrong with NYPD that they have 3 officers on a Friday night, mind you, a known night for increased activity in all parts of the city, and they need to stop a guy from quietly, not in a way that's obnoxiously loud, singing in the subway?
Maybe what they're trying to do is avoid having to deal with all that real stuff that's happening in the city by causing this distraction and then just, spending a couple hours just hanging out in the subway doing this nonsense.
Breaking no law, not even probable cause for the entire police interaction, and he gets arrested. At least it was caught on video, and at least we saw what this is. Also caught on video, a former Scientology member, Mark Rathbun, was at LAX airport, and 3, I guess they're called management. I know it's a religion/cult/business. I don't even know what to call it, but we'll call them management higher-ups from Scientology. We're at the airport and they start harassing Mark Rathbun, and Mark Rathbun actually filmed it. We have it on video. There are 3 people that you'll see in the video harassing him here. There's the bald guy, who's Mark Yeager. He's a high ecclesiastical officer for the mother church of Scientology. The guy holding the camera that you'll see is Dave Bloomberg. He's a longtime Scientology executive strata member. And then you have the woman who's Jenny Linson DeVocht. She's a personal aide to David Miscavige. He is the self-proclaimed Pope of Scientology, accused of beating people, by the way, is David Miscavige. The woman is his personal aide. Check this out and listen very carefully to the use of the word suppressive here.
Works great, doesn't it? It makes you feel good. You can actually get your ethics in, Marty. That would be the thing.
Stop committing suppressive acts. Full-time suppressive acts. Full-time. Unbelievable. Just end it. Go live a life. Why don't you get a life then? Just get a life. You've had 0 effect.
Okay, we don't need to play the whole thing, but I've told my story of when my mom hired a handyman and she went out of town. And I was supposed to check in on the handyman. And I went over to her house and he started asking me about Scientology. And I said, oh, is that thing with the sci-fi writer who made up a religion? And he said, no, it's funny you mentioned that, David. Actually, there's a lot of suppressive people that sometimes will say that, but that's actually not true. He's actually an amazing man. And the handyman subsequently tried to get me to buy Scientology books off of him. He was never hired again by my mom after this incident. But needless to say, that term suppressive is an established term within Scientology. And if you're in any way speaking out against Scientology, if you were in Scientology and you left the cult, if you posted something online like Mark Rathbun did on his blog about Scientology, you're labeled suppressive. And Lewis, you really don't want to be labeled suppressive by the Church of Scientology.
I'd consider it an honor. Germany has outlawed this as they have deemed it, that it is not, they've deemed that it's not a religion. They don't honor it as a religion. This country needs to do that. This video is incredible. You can clearly tell that this woman is absolutely insane.
Yeah, she's completely disconnected from any semblance of reality. She's completely out of her gourd.
Yeah, it's you can tell. She's got those eyes. Incredible video. We should try to get this guy on the show. But then, of course, we might be labeled suppressive.
Let's actually do that. Let's try to get Mark Rathbun on the program to talk about this. I have confidence, Lewis, that we would be able to do it. I think he would be very interested in discussing this. So we will research that. Unfortunately, no time for voicemail today, but I will tell you what's on the bonus show. We have the Chinese 50-cent party. It's not about the rapper. We'll also talk about the UK getting tough on trolls, and Lewis will tell us about airborne wind turbines. There's a whole other show after this show called The Bonus Show. Lewis is the host. I'm the sidekick. You can go to davidpakman.com/membership to check out a sample bonus show and to sign up for membership.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.